Imagine standing on a calm shore, the sun warming your face, when suddenly the earth begins to shake beneath your feet. The birds go silent. The sea pulls back unnaturally far, revealing wet sand and stranded fish. People stare in confusion. And then, a wall of water, taller than a building, crashes toward the land. In just minutes, your village disappears. Your family, your neighbors, your entire world, gone. This isn't a scene from a movie. It's a memory. A memory carried by survivors of the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, one of the deadliest natural disasters in recorded history. Over 230,000 people died across 14 countries. For many, time split in two, before the wave and after. But history is filled with moments like this. Moments when nature didn't just destroy cities, it reshaped the course of civilizations. Today, we're going to explore those moments. Volcanoes that ended empires. Earthquakes that rewrote maps. Famines that changed how people worshipped, migrated, and governed. From the ancient ruins of Pompeii to the dust-covered farms of 1930s America, we'll uncover the powerful, and often surprising, ways natural disasters have shaped who we are today. Now, you might wonder, why focus on disasters? Isn't history already full of enough suffering? That's a fair question. But this story isn't only about destruction. It's about transformation. It's about how humans, when pushed to the edge, respond with fear, with courage, and sometimes, with remarkable creativity. Disasters force choices. And choices build civilizations. By understanding these events, we don't just learn about the past, we understand how fragile and how adaptable we truly are. And along the way, you'll be learning English through meaningful stories, the kind that stay with you long after the video ends. So, take a breath. Let's go back in time. They say Mount Vesuvius gave no warning. On a summer day in 79 CE, the volcano erupted violently, burying the Roman cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum in ash and stone. People were frozen in place, literally, as hot gases suffocated and preserved them in their final moments. For centuries, the cities remained buried, forgotten, until they were rediscovered in the 18th century. What archaeologists found was extraordinary, a detailed snapshot of Roman daily life, from bread still in ovens to graffiti on walls. Ironically, it was disaster that preserved history. But this eruption did more than kill thousands. It shattered confidence in Roman invincibility. For years, it fed superstition, fear, and even political change. Natural disasters don't just hit landscapes, they hit beliefs. And sometimes, they come with a message that humans aren't the only force shaping history. So, as we look deeper, we'll keep asking, what happens when nature takes control? And how do people, across time and cultures, find meaning in the chaos? Whether it's the volcanic winter that may have pushed humanity to the brink 75,000 years ago, or the Great Lisbon earthquake that shook not just buildings but religious faith across Europe, we'll explore not only what happened, but why it mattered. Ready? Let's begin with a question that still haunts scientists, philosophers, and survivors alike, and that sets the stage for everything to come. What does it mean when the ground beneath us, something we trust completely, suddenly turns against us? When we think of what shapes civilization, we usually picture kings, wars, inventions, revolutions. But what if some of the most powerful turning points in history came not from human hands, but from the earth itself? Here's the central question we'll explore together in this story. Can nature shape the destiny of nations just as profoundly as politics, war, or religion? At first glance, natural disasters seem like interruptions, tragic moments in the background of bigger historical movements. But dig deeper, and you'll find something more surprising. In many cases, they were the catalysts. Let's take the year 1815. In Indonesia, a massive volcano called Mount Tambora erupted in April of that year. The explosion was so loud it was heard over 2,000 kilometers away. Ash filled the sky, blocking sunlight. But the real impact was global. Temperatures dropped dramatically across the northern hemisphere. Crops failed in China, India, and much of Europe. Famine spread. In North America, it snowed in June. Historians call it the year without a summer. Now pause. Think about that. One volcanic eruption, from a remote island, triggered worldwide food shortages. Economies collapsed. Riots broke out in cities. Thousands died not from lava, but from hunger. But that's not the end of the story. In Europe, the strange dark skies and social despair inspired a group of writers gathered at a villa in Switzerland. One of them, a young woman named Mary Shelley, began to write a haunting story about science, fear, and unnatural life. That story became Frankenstein. So, in a sense, a volcano helped create modern science fiction. Disasters, then, don't only destroy. They disrupt. They redirect. They reveal the hidden connections between nature, culture, and power. And that leads to another question. When natural forces challenge human systems, do those systems break or evolve? Let's consider a more recent example. In 1970, a powerful cyclone struck what was then East Pakistan, now Bangladesh. Nearly 500,000 people died. The government's slow and inadequate response sparked outrage and protests. The result? A political crisis that led to a war of independence and the birth of a new nation, Bangladesh. In just a few years, the course of history in South Asia changed. And it all began with a storm. These examples matter because they show us something essential. Natural disasters don't exist in a vacuum. They interact with poverty, politics, religion, media, inequality. They test the systems we build. They expose weaknesses. And sometimes, they accelerate change. Today, we face new threats: climate change, rising sea levels, stronger storms, wildfires. But these are not only environmental issues. They're social, economic, political, just like the disasters of the past. So by studying how ancient and modern societies face disaster, we learn not just about history, but about ourselves. How did some people survive when others didn't? Why did some governments collapse while others adapted? What role did fear, faith, or leadership play in shaping the outcome? These are the questions that can teach us resilience, in language, in life, and in how we view the world. And this is why this topic matters. Because the next great shift in history might not come from a battlefield or a treaty. It might come from the sky, the sea, or deep below our feet. So, let's go back now, to the beginning, to a time when a single natural event may have pushed the entire human species to the edge of extinction. Let's explore what happened, and why. Around 74,000 years ago, a supervolcano erupted in what is today Lake Toba, in Sumatra, Indonesia. This wasn't just a regular volcanic explosion. This was one of the largest eruptions in the last 2 million years. Ash from the eruption spread across Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. Some scientists believe the sun was blocked out for months. Global temperatures dropped by up to 3 to 5 degrees Celsius. Crops and plants died. Entire ecosystems collapsed. This was not just a natural disaster, it may have been a turning point in human evolution. At the time, Homo sapiens were still a young species. Some geneticists believe the eruption caused what's known as a population bottleneck, meaning the number of humans on Earth may have dropped to as few as 10,000 individuals. Think about that for a moment. All of us, all 7 billion people alive today, may be descendants of a tiny group of survivors who lived through an ice age triggered by a volcano. Whether this theory is precisely accurate is still debated, but it raises an important idea. The natural world has tested humanity before, not just physically, but existentially. And it's not the only time. Fast forward to ancient Egypt, around 2200 BCE. The Old Kingdom, known for building the Great Pyramids, was a time of powerful centralized government and prosperity. But then, something changed. The Nile River, Egypt's lifeblood, began to flood less regularly. The rains from the Ethiopian highlands became unpredictable. Crops failed. For years, people faced famine. The centralized government, which relied on a stable food supply and social order, began to collapse. Local governors gained more power. The Old Kingdom fell apart. Today, we understand these changes were likely connected to a regional climate shift, possibly a decades-long drought across North Africa and the Middle East. But for the people of the time, it wasn't science. It was the gods turning against them. This collapse of Egypt's Old Kingdom is one of the earliest examples of how environmental change can lead to political instability and regime collapse, a pattern we'll see again and again. Now let's jump ahead to another dramatic chapter, the eruption of Thera, around 1600 BCE, present-day Santorini in Greece. Thera was a massive volcano located in the Aegean Sea. When it erupted, it sent ash and rock flying across the region. Tsunamis followed, crashing into coastal communities. Many historians believe the Minoan civilization on the island of Crete, one of the most advanced of its time, was severely weakened by the disaster. The Minoans were known for their art, architecture, and maritime trade. But after the eruption, they began to decline. Within a generation or two, they were overtaken by the Mycenaeans, the ancestors of classical Greek civilization. So once again, we see a pattern, a powerful civilization weakened by nature, then replaced by a rising power. History turns, not always because of human failure, but because of nature's timing. One more example that brings us closer to modern times, the Lisbon earthquake of 1755. It was a bright Sunday morning, November 1st. People in Lisbon, Portugal, were in church for All Saints' Day when the ground began to shake. Buildings collapsed. Fires broke out. Then a massive tsunami followed. In total, around 60,000 people died. But the shock waves weren't only physical. They were philosophical. Lisbon was one of Europe's wealthiest cities. It was also deeply religious. The earthquake led to a crisis of faith. Why would God allow such destruction, especially during a holy day? Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire began to question religious explanations for suffering and to emphasize reason, science, and human responsibility. In this way, a natural disaster helped spark a shift in European thought, pushing the continent toward modern secularism and scientific inquiry. These stories, from Toba to Lisbon, show us that natural disasters are not just moments of destruction. They are crossroads. They test governments, religions, and ideas. They reveal who adapts and who collapses. They create opportunities for change, both good and bad. Now, as we move forward, let's take a closer look at the often overlooked people and forces that help shape the aftermath of these disasters. What voices have we forgotten? And what hidden dynamics were at play? Before we go there, here's a question to think about, and I'd love to hear your answer in the comments. Do natural disasters bring out the best in us, or the worst? When disaster strikes, history tends to focus on kings, generals, and governments. But often, the real story lies beneath, in the quiet strength of ordinary people, in the invisible decisions made by those who never appear in textbooks. Let's go back to the Lisbon earthquake of 1755. While the elites debated philosophy and policy, it was enslaved people, sailors, and poor women who pulled survivors from the rubble. Lisbon was a port city, home to thousands of laborers and dock workers. In the absence of formal rescue teams, it was they who began the cleanup, organized makeshift shelters, and distributed food. One forgotten figure who did rise to visibility was the Marquis of Pombal. He was the Prime Minister of Portugal at the time. Unlike others in power who were paralyzed by fear or theological confusion, Pombal took immediate action. He famously said, "Now? We bury the dead and feed the living." Under his leadership, Lisbon was not only rebuilt but redesigned with modern urban planning in mind, wider streets, open squares, and buildings engineered to better resist future quakes. But what about the voices never recorded? Women, particularly in ancient societies, often shouldered the emotional labor after disasters. In ancient Egypt, during the collapse of the Old Kingdom, it was women who likely preserved traditions through oral storytelling, herbal medicine, and household rituals. When systems of power break down, culture survives in kitchens, songs, and everyday resilience. And during the famine triggered by the climate shift around 2200 BCE, it's possible that entire communities of farmers, laborers, and nomads migrated across North Africa and the Levant. While official records show a collapse, archaeology shows us adaptation, new settlements, different agricultural tools, shifts in diet. These are signs of human flexibility. People did not simply disappear, they transformed. Sometimes, the forgotten voices belong to cultures entirely erased from mainstream history. Take the eruption of Thera and the fall of the Minoans. Most of what we know comes from ruins and pottery. We don't know the names of the women who wove fabric in Knossos or the sailors who navigated dangerous seas to trade with Egypt. But we do know this: they were part of a vast, interconnected world. The Minoans traded olive oil, wine, and luxury goods across the Mediterranean. After Thera erupted, many of these trade routes collapsed, and with them, opportunities for peaceful contact and cooperation. It's tempting to focus only on destruction. But disaster can also lead to innovation, often driven by those without formal power. In China, during the Yellow River floods, which occurred again and again over thousands of years, local engineers and farmers developed remarkable systems of dikes, canals, and rice paddies. These weren't always royal projects. In many cases, villages collaborated, adapting year by year, learning from mistakes, inventing new ways to tame the water. Even today, rural communities along the Mekong River or in the Andes Mountains use techniques passed down through generations, knowledge built not by scientists in labs, but by those who lived with nature's rhythms. And here's a question that might challenge how we think about progress. Should we consider indigenous and local knowledge just as valuable as scientific expertise when preparing for disasters today? Because throughout history, it was often these unseen forces, the wisdom of elders, the instincts of mothers, the skill of craftsmen, that truly carried societies through crisis. In modern terms, we might call this community resilience. It's a term used in disaster studies to describe how groups of people, often with limited resources, support each other, rebuild, and adapt to change. This is not just about emergency supplies or evacuation routes. It's about trust, connection, and shared memory. And sometimes, that makes all the difference. As we turn now to the broader social and psychological impact of these disasters, let's keep this in mind. History may be written by the victors, but survival is often ensured by the invisible. Let's explore what happens inside a society, inside human hearts and minds, when the earth shakes, the skies darken, or the waters rise. Imagine walking through a city that was once full of life, now silent. Buildings cracked open, streets buried in ash or water, neighbors missing. In the aftermath of a major disaster, society doesn't just rebuild physically, it also goes through deep psychological and emotional transformation. Let's begin again with the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 CE. The city of Pompeii was buried in a single day, frozen in time. But what's often missed in the story is the long aftermath, the survivors, those who escaped. They didn't simply resume life as normal. Many were displaced for years. Roman society at large was shaken by the realization that even the mighty empire could not control nature. The eruption inspired new religious devotion, superstitions, and art focused on death and fate. Similarly, the Lisbon earthquake of 1755 caused a crisis not just of infrastructure, but of faith. Many people interpreted the disaster as divine punishment. Philosophers like Voltaire and Rousseau debated what it meant for God to allow such suffering, especially on a religious holiday, in one of Europe's most devout cities. These debates would influence the Enlightenment and even modern ideas about the role of government in protecting citizens. The emotional impact rippled across Europe. Sometimes, disasters don't just shake individuals, they shift entire cultures. The year without a summer in 1816, caused by the eruption of Mount Tambora, had global psychological effects. Across Europe, the skies were gloomy for months. Crops failed. Prices rose. People feared the end of the world. It was during this eerie summer that Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein, a story born from darkness, isolation, and questions about human responsibility. In many cultures, the emotional response to disaster is collective. After the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, some communities in Indonesia and Sri Lanka performed mass mourning rituals, building public memory through shared experience. Others used music, storytelling, or religious ceremonies to process grief and find meaning. Trauma, in these cases, wasn't treated only individually, it was woven into the culture. But reactions can also vary dramatically based on political systems. After the Tangshan earthquake in China in 1976, which killed over 240,000 people, the government was slow to acknowledge the full scale of the tragedy. For many survivors, the lack of transparency added a layer of emotional pain. Grief was silenced. Public mourning was limited. The same event, had it happened in a different system, might have resulted in a different kind of national healing, or at least public discourse. On the other hand, during the Dust Bowl of the 1930s in the United States, communities responded with creativity. Photographers like Dorothea Lange captured the suffering and dignity of displaced families. Writers like John Steinbeck gave voice to the pain and perseverance of those who lost their homes. Government programs followed, some successful, some not, but culturally, the trauma was acknowledged and given space. So how do humans cope when everything they know collapses? Some cling to faith. Others turn to science. Many turn to each other. Disasters often expose the best and worst of human nature, selfishness and solidarity, fear and courage, despair and creativity. Psychologists today use the term post-traumatic growth to describe how people, and sometimes whole societies, grow stronger after adversity. This doesn't mean the pain disappears. But it means people find meaning, build new values, and sometimes change for the better. In fact, some of the most important social reforms in history followed major disasters. After the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, for example, building codes were rewritten. After the 2011 Fukushima disaster in Japan, there were debates about nuclear energy, risk, and transparency. In both cases, public memory shaped future policy. But here's a question for all of us to consider. When disaster strikes, natural or human-made, do we remember the lessons? Or do we only act in the moment, then forget? History offers us many answers, but few are simple. The real insight lies in how we respond, not just in rebuilding cities, but in rebuilding trust, identity, and hope. Next, we'll reflect on these lessons and ask what they mean for the world we live in today, a world still shaped by storms, quakes, and floods, but also by the choices we make in response. It's tempting to think of natural disasters as belonging to the past, ancient eruptions, medieval famines, or 20th century earthquakes. But the truth is, nature is still reshaping our world. The difference is, today we have more science, more communication, and more power to prepare, or to fail. Let's reflect on a few of the key lessons these historical disasters offer us, not just as stories, but as warnings and guides for the future. First, history shows that disasters are never just about nature. They're also about human decisions. The Irish potato famine wasn't only caused by a plant disease, it was made far worse by political indifference and rigid economic systems. Similarly, Hurricane Katrina in 2005 revealed not only the force of the storm, but the deep inequality and government failures that made recovery so slow and painful for thousands in New Orleans. That's the first lesson: disasters test the strength and fairness of the systems we live in. Second, how we remember disasters affects how we prepare for the next ones. After the 2011 tsunami and nuclear disaster in Fukushima, Japan completely changed how it regulates nuclear energy. Seawalls were rebuilt, evacuation systems upgraded. But this didn't happen by chance. It came from public demand, memory, and accountability. Some countries have built strong disaster memory cultures. In Chile, for instance, where earthquakes are common, school children regularly practice quake drills, and buildings are designed with seismic activity in mind. That awareness doesn't eliminate danger, but it saves lives. This brings us to the second lesson: preparedness isn't just science, it's culture. And third, disasters often show us who we are, and who we could be. In many places, we've seen communities come together in the most inspiring ways. After the 2004 tsunami, people around the world donated money, time, and expertise. Engineers, teachers, volunteers, ordinary people turned grief into action. And after more recent climate disasters, from wildfires in Australia to floods in Pakistan, similar stories of human kindness have emerged. But we've also seen the opposite, the spread of misinformation, corruption, or blame. In some cases, governments have hidden the truth or downplayed danger, putting millions at risk. So the third lesson is a personal one. In the face of disaster, will we act with empathy, honesty, and responsibility? As our planet warms, climate-related disasters are becoming more frequent and more intense. Rising sea levels, stronger hurricanes, longer droughts, this is not just theory. It's already happening. In 2023, the Mediterranean storm Daniel devastated parts of Libya, with thousands killed in a single night due to collapsing dams and lack of warning systems. In 2020, wildfires in Australia burned over 18 million hectares, a scale hard to even imagine. These are not isolated events. They're part of a global pattern. But just like the disasters of the past, the outcomes will depend on our choices. Will we invest in resilient infrastructure? Will we protect the most vulnerable? Will we learn from history or ignore it? One powerful way to face these questions is through education. Learning about disasters isn't just for historians or scientists. It's for all of us, to understand the patterns, to recognize the warning signs, and to build a culture of awareness and solidarity. And perhaps, most importantly, these stories remind us of something deeper, that no matter how advanced our technology becomes, we are still part of nature, not above it. We cannot control the Earth's forces. But we can control how we prepare, how we support each other, and how we grow from tragedy. So let me ask you this. Do you think today's societies are doing enough to prepare for the disasters of tomorrow, or are we repeating the same patterns, just with more modern tools? There's no easy answer. But asking the question is the first step toward change. In the final section, we'll look at the language and vocabulary we've explored, and how you can use these expressions to think, speak, and write more powerfully about the world around you. Let's take a moment to highlight some of the useful English expressions and sentence structures you've encountered in this story. These phrases are not just great for understanding history, they're powerful tools for speaking and writing about complex topics like society, crisis, and resilience. I'll explain each term or structure in context and give you an example you can practice with. 1. To stand the test of time. Meaning, to remain valuable, respected, or relevant over a long period. In the story, some responses, like the rebuilding of Lisbon, stood the test of time. Example, true friendship stands the test of time, even through hardship. 2. To turn the tide. Meaning, to reverse a situation or change the direction of events. In the story, it was the codebreakers who turned the tide during the war. Example, the new policy helped turn the tide against unemployment. 3. To be at the mercy of. Meaning, to be in a situation where someone or something else has complete power over you. In the story, entire cities were at the mercy of nature. Example, small businesses are often at the mercy of market trends. 4. A double-edged sword. Meaning, something that has both positive and negative effects. In the story, industrial growth was a double-edged sword. It brought prosperity but also environmental risk. Example, social media is a double-edged sword. It connects us but also spreads misinformation. 5. To bring something to light. Meaning, to reveal something previously unknown or hidden. In the story, the famine brought to light the failings of the British government. Example, the investigation brought several problems to light. 6. To ripple across. Meaning, to spread gradually across a wide area or group. In the story, the eruption's impact rippled across continents. Example, the news of the policy change rippled across the education sector. 7. Past unreal conditional, if, had, would have. Meaning, used to talk about imagined alternatives to past situations. In the story, if leaders had acted earlier, fewer lives might have been lost. Example, if I had studied geology, I would have understood this better. 8. To be a wake-up call. Meaning, an event that makes people realize they must change something. In the story, the disaster was a wake-up call for urban planners. Example, the heat wave was a wake-up call about climate change. 9. To bear the brunt of. Meaning, to experience the worst or most intense part of something. In the story, it was often the poor who bore the brunt of the disaster. Example, coastal towns bore the brunt of the storm. 10. To sweep through. Meaning, to move quickly and forcefully through an area. In the story, the storm swept through entire provinces. Example, a feeling of panic swept through the crowd. Now, here's a reflection activity you can try. Choose 3 expressions from this list and write a short paragraph about a challenge you or your community faced. It could be natural, emotional, or even historical. How would you describe it using these powerful phrases? Remember, using real stories and emotional connection is what helps these words stick in your memory. And when you use them in conversation, people will hear the depth in your language. When we look back at these moments in history, the eruption of Mount Vesuvius, the Lisbon earthquake, the Irish famine, and the Dust Bowl, we realize something important. These were not just natural disasters. They were tests of humanity. Tests of our humility, our capacity to learn, our ability to rebuild, and above all, our responsibility to each other. They remind us that nature is not just a backdrop to human history. It is a powerful actor, sometimes calm, sometimes violent, always shaping the story we live in. And while we can't always control what happens to us, we can choose how we respond. We can choose to act with wisdom, compassion, and foresight. History shows that communities who listened, who learned, and who adapted, they survived. Some even thrived. But there's another truth, too. These disasters revealed the cracks in our systems, in how we treat the vulnerable, how we plan cities, how we value science. That makes us ask ourselves, even today, if another massive natural disaster struck tomorrow, would we be more prepared, or would we repeat the same mistakes? And whose voices would we finally hear? You see, history isn't a warning. It's a conversation. One that continues in every generation, including ours. If this story moved you, or made you think, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Which part of today's journey stood out the most to you, and why? Have you or your country ever experienced a natural disaster that changed people's thinking? I read every comment. And your stories help others learn, reflect, and feel connected. If you'd like to see more videos like this, where we explore English through real, powerful stories, please like this video, share it with someone curious, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Because next time, we'll explore a different kind of force that reshaped the modern world, not nature, but human action. The story of the Berlin Wall, and what it really meant to live divided by ideology. What tore it down wasn't just politics, it was human courage. So until then, keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep listening to the world around you. History has so much to teach us. And learning English is one of the best ways to hear what it has to say. Thank you for joining me. See you next time.